I was cramming for my neurobiology final, headphones in, textbooks spread across the dining table, when my dad called my name. His voice had that edge, tight, like he was trying too hard to stay calm. I looked up, surprised to see both of my parents standing stiffly in the living room, arms crossed, faces carved in stone. My sister Rachel sat nearby, her eyes red and rimmed like she'd been crying. Jake, her husband, wasn't there. "We need to talk," my mom said, holding up a stack of printed screenshots. Text messages. Dozens of them. She dropped them on the coffee table like they were evidence in a courtroom. "You've been trying to seduce your sister's husband," my dad said flatly. "Don't lie. We've seen the messages." My mouth opened. Nothing came out. My brain was still flipping through neurons and synapses, not betrayal and insanity. "What?" I whispered. Mom leaned forward, pointing at one message. "These are from your number. Flirty. Disgusting. You've been sneaking around behind your sister's back." "No," I said, breathless. "That's not me. That's not real." But their minds were already made up. They didn't want truth. They wanted a villain. And I had just been cast. I don't even remember packing. Just throwing everything into my backpack, laptop, charger, notes, 2 shirts, my toothbrush. Finals started the next morning, but apparently, my name had already been written in red ink across the family blacklist. Rachel didn't speak. She didn't even look at me. Her silence hurt more than the screaming would have. It was raining. Of course it was. One of those Texas spring storms that rolls in out of nowhere, fast and heavy. I stood on the porch soaked to the skin, clutching my stuff, my phone buzzing in my pocket with a text from my boyfriend, "Good luck tomorrow. You got this." I didn't respond. No one offered me a ride. No one asked where I'd go. I walked down the driveway alone, headlights passing me like ghosts on wet pavement. And I kept walking. That was 6 months ago. 6 months since my parents ripped the ground out from under me. 6 months since Rachel let me take the fall for something I didn't do. 6 months since I learned betrayal doesn't always come from enemies, it often wears your last name. Now they're back. Not for an apology. Not to right or wrong. No. They're here because Grandpa's gone, and they found out he left everything to me. Not a text. Not a call. They showed up on my doorstep like nothing had ever happened. And now, after destroying me, they want the money. But this time, I'm not the girl crying in the rain. Before we dive into today's story, I just want to say thank you. If you're here, listening, it means the world to me. Your support, whether it's a comment, a share, or just lending your time, helps this channel grow and keeps these stories alive. If this story resonates with you, drop a 1 in the comments. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe, it's free, and it helps more than you know. Now, let's get into it. Before everything shattered, my life was structured. Predictable, even. I lived at home, not because I wanted to, but because it made sense. Rent in Austin wasn't cheap, and with tuition, textbooks, and weekend shifts at the campus library, I needed to cut corners wherever I could. My parents offered me a room as long as I kept my priorities straight. And I did. Dean's List 3 semesters in a row. I stayed out of trouble, out of parties, and out of anyone's way. Most days started the same, early run, shower, eggs and coffee in silence while my dad read headlines aloud like I couldn't use my own phone. Rachel and Jake usually came down around 9, all smiles and inside jokes. Mom fawned over them while I disappeared behind my laptop, finishing lectures and flashcards. I was used to it, the feeling of being extra, like I was staying in someone else's house. My boyfriend, Adam, lived 2 states away. We met in a summer research program and clicked instantly. He was focused, kind, the kind of guy who texted me chemistry mnemonics before exams and stayed on FaceTime while I studied. My parents never liked him. Too far. Too unavailable. Not a real relationship, my mom once said, pouring coffee like her opinion was just casual conversation. But I didn't care. Adam made me feel seen in a house that barely noticed when I walked in. Looking back, I think I knew I was always one misstep away from being pushed out. Like they were just waiting for a reason. I played by the rules, stayed in line, but it didn't matter. All it took was one lie. One fake message. And suddenly, I was the villain in someone else's story. And no one cared enough to ask if it was true. It was the night before my neurofinal. I just brewed my second cup of coffee when my dad called me into the living room. "Natalie," he said, his voice clipped. "We need to talk. Now." I walked in expecting something mundane, maybe a complaint about dishes or my late-night studying habits. What I didn't expect was Rachel sitting on the couch, knees pressed together, eyes swollen. My mom stood behind her with a manila folder in hand, like she was presenting evidence in court. "What is this?" I asked, eyes darting between them. My mom dropped the folder on the coffee table with a heavy thud. Inside, printed screenshots, dozens of them. Text messages. Messages that looked like they were from me. Flirty. Suggestive. Shameless. All sent to Jake. My mouth went dry. I picked up one of the sheets and scanned it. The contact name said Jake. The number matched his. But the words, God, the words, they weren't mine. I had never sent anything remotely close to this garbage. My fingers trembled as I flipped through the pages. "What is this supposed to be?" I asked. My dad stepped forward, face tight with disgust. "Don't play dumb. These came from your number. From your phone." "No, they didn't. Someone spoofed it or faked it or..." "Enough," Mom snapped. "You've humiliated your sister. You've crossed a line. Where's Jake?" I asked, breath caught in my throat. "If this is real, then he should be here. We should all talk." "He's too upset to speak to you right now," Rachel said softly. It was the first time she'd spoken. Her voice cracked, and for a second, her eyes flicked up to meet mine. There was pain in them. But no certainty. No defense. No fight for me. "Rachel, I didn't do this," I said quietly. "You know I wouldn't." She looked away. That broke me more than the accusations ever could. My dad moved toward the hallway. "Pack your things. You're leaving tonight." "What?" "You will not stay under this roof after what you've done," he said. "Not another hour." "I have finals tomorrow," I whispered. "This is insane." "You made your choices," my mom said, arms folded. "Actions have consequences." I stood frozen. Betrayal sat heavy in my chest, tightening every breath. Not one person asked me to explain. Not one considered that I might be telling the truth. There was no trial. No second chance. Just judgment. And a door closing behind me. I don't remember packing. Just the weight in my chest and the silence ringing in my ears. I grabbed my laptop, some notes, a change of clothes, and a phone charger. Everything else blurred. By the time I stepped outside, the rain had started. Light at first, but steady. The kind that soaks through your sleeves before you even notice. I stood in the driveway, blinking against the streetlights and drizzle, trying to call Adam. No answer. I didn't blame him. It was late, and I hadn't told him anything yet. I didn't even know where to start. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my hoodie, though I couldn't tell where the rain stopped and the tears began, and dialed a different number. "Grandma?" My voice cracked. "Can I come over?" She didn't ask questions. Just said yes, told me to be safe, and that the door would be unlocked. As I turned back toward the house for one last glance, I caught my mom's voice through the front window. "Once she's gone," she said softly, "things will be normal again." I stood there, numb. She didn't whisper it with malice. Not even anger. Just relief. Like my presence had always been a problem. Like I'd never really belonged. Something broke in me in that moment, not because they kicked me out, but because it was so easy for them. So clean. A few minutes later, I was walking alone down the street in the rain, soaked to the skin, backpack cutting into my shoulders. Headlights passed me like I wasn't even there. And maybe, to them, I never really was. The porch light was already on when I got there. My shoes squished with every step, the rain finally easing up into a quiet mist. I hesitated at the door, not because I didn't want to go in, but because stepping inside meant letting everything crash down at once. Grandma opened it before I could even knock. She didn't say anything. Just pulled me in, wet clothes and all, into the kind of hug I hadn't felt in years. I hadn't realized how tense my body was until that second. Her hand moved gently over the back of my head like she used to when I was little and afraid of thunderstorms. She held me like I hadn't done something wrong. Like I wasn't a disgrace. Like I was still hers. Grandpa shuffled in from the den, eyebrows furrowed behind his thick glasses. "You're soaked," he said simply, and went to grab me a towel. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. I slept on the pull-out in the guest room, next to the humming oxygen machine that Grandpa kept beside his chair. Every few hours it would hiss and click, a soft rhythm that somehow became comforting. While he napped in the afternoons, I sat at the little card table by the window and studied flashcards under a dim lamp. Finals week passed like a fever dream. I went from exam to exam on autopilot, borrowing my grandma's car when I could and biking when I couldn't. My hair stayed tied back. Hood up. Eyes forward. No one at school knew what had happened, and I didn't want them to. What shocked me wasn't that I made it through. What shocked me was that I passed. Every single class. Even neuro. Top of the curve. When the grades came in, I sat on the back porch, phone in my lap, staring at the screen while Grandma brought out lemonade like it was any ordinary summer afternoon. "You did it, baby," she said, smiling gently. I nodded, but the truth was, getting those grades felt less like winning and more like surviving. And for now, that was enough. The message came in the middle of dinner. I hadn't touched much of my food, just pushed mashed potatoes around the plate while Grandma told a story about how I used to sneak powdered sugar straight from the cupboard. My phone buzzed on the table. I glanced down. "Dad, you're being spoiled. We raised a liar. And now they're rewarding you for it. Don't think that makes you right." My stomach flipped. I didn't show Grandma. I didn't need to. She must have noticed the way my shoulders tightened because she reached over and squeezed my wrist. "You don't have to read that stuff while you eat," she said. I nodded, locked the screen, and flipped the phone face down. That was my dad's way of keeping control, cutting me with silence, then pretending he was just being firm. But that message, it wasn't disappointment. It was hatred dressed up as discipline. He didn't want the truth. He wanted me erased. Grandpa didn't say much during those weeks. He never had been the talkative type. His way of showing care came in small, deliberate ways, bringing me his old calculator for my stats final, leaving a hot cup of tea on the nightstand while I studied late. But one afternoon, as we cleaned out the shed, he handed me a weathered envelope. No stamp. No name. Just my initials in his sharp handwriting. Inside was a single note, folded twice. "Call Sam Keller. And never trust what wears a smile too soon." That was it. I looked up, confused. Grandpa just nodded, as if that explained everything. "Who's Sam Keller?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Just went back to sorting nails into jars. After a while, he said, "Just someone who knows what to do when people stop being honest." That night, I lay awake rereading the note under the light of my phone, the words looping in my head like a warning and a promise all at once. Something in my gut told me Grandpa wasn't just trying to protect me. He was preparing me. He died quietly. One morning, I came into the living room to find Grandpa still in his recliner, his hand resting gently on the armrest, his chest still. At first, I thought he was sleeping. He often nodded off there during the early news. But something in the room felt stiller than usual. Hollow. I stepped closer, called his name. Nothing. His skin was warm, but fading. His lips slightly parted. And there, on the side table, was a crossword half-finished and a folded note for Grandma, just her name, written in block letters. My knees gave out. I don't remember falling. Just the sound of Grandma's slippers on the hardwood as she came in behind me. She didn't scream or collapse. She knelt beside him, brushed the hair from his forehead, and whispered, "Thank you for staying long enough." We sat with him for a long time. At some point, I broke. I curled into her side like I had when I was 5 and scraped my knee on the sidewalk. And she held me again. "He believed in you," she said, her voice steady but soaked in grief. "Even when no one else did. Never forget that." The next few days blurred. I handled the arrangements, called the funeral home, coordinated with the church, spoke to the florist about daisies because they were his favorite. Grandma handled the quiet parts, picking out his suit, collecting old photos for the memory table. Neither of us talked much. We didn't need to. 3 days before the service, I reached out to my cousin Shelby to confirm the extended family was informed. She texted back almost immediately. "Shelby, your parents won't be there." I stared at the screen. Me, did they say why? A few moments later, a second message came through. "Shelby, they're in Miami. Just posted pictures this morning. Cocktails and palm trees. Looked like some anniversary trip." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to the dining table where Grandma was folding thank you cards and sat across from her. I told her the truth, calmly, without anger. Her hands paused mid-fold. "They missed their own father's funeral," I said. "Because mimosas mattered more." She closed her eyes for a second, breathing in through her nose. Then she nodded once, slow and heavy, like she'd already prepared for this. "They already lost him a long time ago," she murmured. "Now they've just made it official." They showed up 2 days after the funeral like nothing had happened. I was helping Grandma rearrange the living room furniture when the doorbell rang. She was halfway through asking if I'd seen her reading glasses when I opened the door, and froze. My parents stood there. My dad in a crisp button-down and my mom with a plastic container of cookies in her hands, like this was some awkward holiday visit and not the fallout of betrayal. Behind them, Rachel lingered on the porch steps, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. "Hi, sweetheart," Mom said. Her voice was too high. Too smooth. "We wanted to come check on you. And your grandmother, of course." I didn't move. Didn't smile. I think I blinked, maybe once. "We heard about the service," Dad said, nodding solemnly. "We're sorry we couldn't be there." Couldn't. Not didn't. "I'm sure it was beautiful," Mom added, her smile tight, like she was rehearsing empathy. They stepped inside without being asked. My hand dropped from the door. Rachel didn't speak. Just followed behind them like a ghost. I stood still while they walked into the home they hadn't visited in years. Grandma emerged from the hallway, holding her glasses in one hand and a tissue in the other. Her eyes narrowed, not hostile, just tired. "We wanted to move forward as a family," Dad said suddenly, like it had been weighing on him. "No grudges. Life's too short." There it was. The pitch. Like all of this could be reset with a couple of sugar cookies and a blanket statement about forgiveness. I waited until Grandma excused herself to the kitchen before I spoke. "You weren't at the funeral," I said. My voice was low, but it didn't shake. They froze. Mom's smile flickered. "We were out of town," she said quickly. It had been planned for months. I tilted my head. Miami looked nice. That did it. A pause. Too long. Dad's jaw clenched just enough to catch it. "You were watching our social media?" he asked, turning it back on me like I'd violated something sacred. "No," I said. "Shelby sent me the pictures. Looked like a great trip." Rachel still hadn't said a word. She sat on the edge of the couch like she wanted to melt into the floor. I planned everything, I added. Alone. We figured you'd want space, Mom said softly. I didn't respond. Just walked over to the window, pulled back the curtain, and stared at the driveway. Their car was still running. Their visit wouldn't last long. Because if they'd come looking for forgiveness, they were already too late. The reading of the will took place 3 days later in Mr. Holloway's modest office, an old friend of Grandpa's, and a man who wore the same tweed jacket no matter the season. The air smelled like paper and pipe tobacco, and the carpet had indentations from furniture that hadn't moved in decades. I sat beside Grandma, holding her hand, while my parents and Rachel sat stiffly across from us. My mother had dressed like she was auditioning for a magazine cover, soft blush tones, subtle pearls. My dad looked bored, like he had better things to do. Mr. Holloway adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began reading. It was straightforward. Grandpa left all of his savings, everything in his name, to me. Every dollar in every account. The house would remain in Grandma's name, solely and irrevocably. Then came the clause. If any party related by blood or marriage to the deceased attempts to contest this will, all assets, including a property in Jacksonville, Florida, shall be transferred to the contesting party, along with any debts, liens, or associated tax burdens. The beneficiary, Natalie Jane Pierce, shall retain all remaining rights and be released from liability. There was a pause. A quiet one. Then my dad laughed. Out loud. Jacksonville, he scoffed. That old shack we stayed in once during a hurricane? Mom chuckled too, relieved. You can't be serious. I didn't say a word. It took them a full minute to realize no one else was laughing. Mr. Holloway didn't blink. He just handed them a packet with Grandpa's signature, notarized and date-stamped 6 months ago. You're saying he actually left her everything, my dad said, his voice tightening. And put that clause in? Mr. Holloway nodded once. Your father was very clear about his intentions. He understood your history. And he wanted to ensure Natalie and Helen were protected. My mother's face shifted then, not anger, but disbelief. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me. Like I had transformed into someone dangerous. This is absurd, she muttered. We'll have our attorney look this over. You can, Mr. Holloway replied calmly. Just be sure to read the section about immediate transfer of encumbered assets. That Florida property? It's condemned. He knew you'd try this. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I'd heard in months. They didn't come for reconciliation. They came for the money. And Grandpa knew it. I didn't flinch. While my father fumed and my mother whispered threats under her breath, I stayed still. Calm. Centered. You can do what you need to, I said evenly. We're protected. Grandpa made sure of it. Dad's eyes snapped to mine, searching for fear. There wasn't any. Just a quiet certainty that seemed to unsettle him more than yelling ever could. You think you've won? He sneered. This won't stand. There are ways around this. I stood up slowly, pressing my palms to the arms of the chair. You've already lost. You just haven't figured it out yet. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The room felt too small for all that bitterness. And yet, I felt bigger than I had in months. As I turned to leave, Mr. Holloway handed me a small envelope. From your grandfather, he said gently. Said to give it to you when the time was right. The man Grandpa told me to call, Sam Keller, met me 2 days later at a quiet cafe just outside of town. He looked nothing like I expected. Mid-30s, easy smile, leather satchel over one shoulder. But his eyes were sharp, precise, like he could read motives before a word was spoken. He ordered a black coffee. I ordered tea. I knew Walter for 15 years, he said once we settled in. He came to me last spring. Said he was worried his legacy would fall into the wrong hands. He handed me a folder. Inside were notarized documents, property records, email chains, all laid out with dates, signatures, clauses. He didn't just make a will, Sam continued. He built a plan. One that couldn't be twisted. One that would spring a trap the moment they made a move. I skimmed the pages, my heart pounding harder with each line. He had predicted everything. The contesting. The manipulation. Even the Florida property. They had tried to convince Grandpa to sell it years ago, but he kept it for this exact reason. He knew they'd come back when it suited them, Sam said. But he also knew they'd never come for you. My throat tightened, but I forced the lump down. He was right, I said quietly. About all of it. Sam gave a small nod. You were the only one he trusted. By the end of the week, word got around. My parents had already contacted 2 different lawyers, asking if the will could be overturned. They claimed emotional coercion, suggested that Grandpa wasn't of sound mind. That I had manipulated him. The same girl they kicked out of their house without a suitcase now, suddenly, had enough power to engineer a conspiracy. Grandma and I didn't panic. We cooked. We gardened. We kept receipts. And when we spoke of my father, it was only in the past tense. It was just past 8 a.m. when the knock came. I was still in pajamas, barefoot, sipping coffee on the porch with Grandma when I saw the car pull up. I didn't recognize it at first, but the moment the door opened and Rachel stepped out, I froze. She looked hollow. Hair unbrushed. Eyes swollen and red. Her blouse was wrinkled, jeans stained with what looked like spilled coffee. She stood there a moment before walking up the steps, her arms wrapped tightly around herself like she was holding the pieces in. I opened the door before she could knock again. Can I come in? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside. The moment she crossed the threshold, she broke. Her body collapsed into sobs, shoulders shaking so violently I thought she might fall. I didn't know what to do, so I just wrapped my arms around her and let her cry. She clung to me like she couldn't stand on her own. I'm sorry, she kept saying. I'm so sorry. I led her to the couch, handed her tissues, and waited. Eventually, through broken words and shaking hands, she told me what happened. She'd flown out to surprise Jake during one of his client trips. A last-minute impulse after a weird gut feeling. She showed up at the hotel room he'd claimed was comped by his firm. He opened the door in a robe. And behind him, in bed, was a woman half-dressed, laughing at something on his phone. Rachel wiped her eyes and looked at me, cheeks flushed with humiliation. When I confronted him, I lost it, she said. I screamed. Asked him if he ever actually believed you were flirting with him. She paused. Her voice cracked. That's when he said, it wasn't you. It was never you. My stomach twisted. She pulled out her phone and opened the same screenshots my parents had waved in my face months ago. His other phone. His burner or whatever. He saved her number under your name. He used you to cover his affair. I stared at the screen, stunned by the familiarity of the messages, only this time, seeing them through Rachel's eyes. I didn't want to believe it, she whispered. I told myself you were guilty because it was easier than facing the truth. She looked at me, tear-streaked and hollow. And I let them destroy you. I let him destroy you. I sat in silence, unsure if I wanted to scream or cry or just walk out of the room. Instead, I did none of that. I reached for her hand. And held it. Rachel stayed on the couch for hours, knees pulled to her chest, her words coming in broken fragments. She barely touched the tea Grandma brought her. When the sun dipped below the trees and shadows stretched across the living room, she finally looked at me. Can I stay here? She asked softly. Just for a few days. I don't want to be alone right now. I didn't answer immediately. I stared at her, this woman who had sat silent while I was kicked out of our childhood home. The same sister who hadn't returned a single text when I was sleeping on Grandma's pull-out bed, juggling exams and heartbreak. She hadn't believed me then. And she hadn't fought for me. But now she was the one shattered. Now she knew what betrayal felt like, its weight, its silence, its burn. I didn't owe her anything. But I looked at the space beside me on the couch, the way she couldn't meet my eyes, and I exhaled. "Yeah," I said quietly. "You can stay." She broke down all over again, and I let her. Later that night, Grandma sat beside me at the kitchen table, peeling apples for a pie she didn't need to bake. "She's still family," she said, not looking up. I nodded, unsure how to respond. She was wrong. Deeply. But sometimes people can't see clearly until it's too late. "She helped them destroy me," I whispered. "She did," Grandma said. "But now she's the one being destroyed. And you have a choice." I looked at her, eyes burning. "To do what?" "To forgive," she said simply. "Not to forget. Not to pretend it didn't happen. Just to stop carrying it." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the den, scrolling through my old messages, searching, aimless, just needing noise in my head that wasn't my own thoughts. Out of habit, I opened the family group chat I hadn't touched in months. It was dead. But something caught my eye, a backup folder, tucked in my phone's cloud. Old message threads. Archived conversations. One of them was from Jake. And it wasn't addressed to me. It was a string of texts between him and my mother. Compliments. Innuendos. Her saying how charming he was. Him calling her the only one who really understands me. A few screenshots. Photos I didn't want to look at. My blood went cold. Jake hadn't just fooled Rachel. He'd been my mother's favorite. Her golden son-in-law. Her pick. And when she saw a chance to protect him and get rid of me at the same time, she took it. She let me take the fall. They came back the following Sunday. Same car. Same overdone smiles. This time, they brought gifts, pastries from the upscale bakery in town, a new scarf for Grandma, a potted orchid with a card that read "For healing and new beginnings." I watched them from the porch as they approached. Dad carried a box like it was some kind of peace treaty. Mom had that same too-sweet tone she used when she was trying to control a conversation with kindness. "We just wanted to stop by," she said, placing the orchid carefully on the porch railing. "No pressure. Just to see you." Dad gave a small nod, his voice low. "I know things got out of hand. We were misled, Natalie. You have to understand, we only wanted to protect Rachel. We didn't know." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "We made mistakes," he continued. "But we're here now. That has to count for something." Rachel stood behind me, silent, her arms tucked across her chest like a barrier. "We'd like to start over," Mom added. "As a family. Clean slate." I looked at them both. The desperation was subtle, but it was there. Not just in their eyes, but in the way they clung to the moment like it was their last shot. Maybe it was. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I stepped forward and met my father's eyes with a stillness that startled even me. "You didn't just fail me," I said. "You failed Grandpa." He flinched, like the words hit somewhere deeper than expected. "You left him. You ignored him. You missed his funeral. And now you want to stand here and pretend like we can wipe the slate clean? With cookies and flowers?" My mom's face crumpled slightly, but I didn't stop. "You didn't defend me when I needed you. You threw me out. You believed lies because it was easier than facing the truth. And now that you've lost control, you want grace." I paused. "That's not how this works." They didn't speak. Behind me, I heard the front door creak as Grandma opened it slowly. "I think it's time for you to go," she said gently, but firmly. And they did. No hugs. No second chances. Just the sound of footsteps on gravel and the quiet slam of a car door. Rachel filed the papers the following week. No dramatic confrontation, no shouting match in the driveway. Just a quiet call to her lawyer and a signed envelope dropped at the courthouse. Jake didn't fight it. He didn't even call. Maybe he knew there was nothing left to salvage. She moved into the guest room and started seeing a therapist twice a week. On some mornings, I'd catch her sitting in the backyard with a mug of coffee and a notebook, her handwriting slow and shaky, like she was trying to relearn how to speak to herself with kindness. There were days she didn't get out of bed. Days she didn't eat. But she tried. She helped Grandma plant fall tomatoes. Picked out new curtains for the kitchen. Started volunteering at the local animal shelter. It was small, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, we weren't just coexisting. We were healing, together. One evening, as we folded laundry on the porch, Grandma looked up from a towel she was smoothing and said, "Your father called me." I stopped folding. "He apologized," she added. "Said he regrets what happened. Said he wants to be part of our lives again." I waited for her next sentence. She folded the towel in half, then in half again, then met my gaze. And I told him, "An apology is words. But you abandoned your father when he needed you most. That doesn't go away with a phone call." She didn't say it with anger. Just truth. "He apologized," she said again. "But that doesn't buy back years." Looking back now, I can see it clearly. Being kicked out, betrayed, broken down to nothing, it all felt like the end of the world. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of mine. The life I've built, the peace I've earned, the woman I've become, none of that would have existed if they hadn't slammed that door. And I've never been more grateful that they did. I used to think family was something permanent. Like blood guaranteed belonging. Like your last name meant someone would catch you when the world let you fall. But the truth is, family isn't about who shares your DNA. It's about who shows up. Who listens. Who believes you when it's easier not to. It's about who fights for your name when it's being dragged through the mud. Blood isn't loyalty. Sometimes, it's just an excuse people use to control you. To shame you into silence. To call manipulation love and abandonment discipline. I spent years twisting myself into knots trying to be enough for people who only saw me as an accessory to Rachel's spotlight. I followed their rules, bent to their expectations, stayed small and polite and invisible, hoping one day they'd look at me the way they looked at her. But they never did. And the moment I threatened the illusion they'd built for themselves, they cut me loose without hesitation. That's not family. That's ownership. And I don't belong to anyone. They tried to break me. Tried to bury me beneath lies, silence, shame. But Grandpa saw it all coming. Long before I did. He saw their patterns, their priorities. He saw who I was trying to become, and who they refused to let me be. And he built a safety net. Not just with money, or legal protection. But with trust. With love that didn't require performance. He taught me that standing alone with integrity is better than standing in a crowd that doubts your worth. That sometimes the quietest people see the most, and say the least, until it matters. When he passed, it felt like the floor disappeared beneath my feet. But now I know he wasn't leaving me behind. He was lifting me forward. He made sure I had the space to grow. To choose. To become someone I could actually respect. And that's the kind of legacy no courtroom or bloodline can take away from me. The air was cool that evening. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the gravel path behind Grandma's house. I walked alone. Not lonely, just alone. There's a difference. The sky glowed soft orange, brushing the treetops with gold. Every step forward felt quiet and full. Like peace was no longer a place I was chasing, but something I carried in my own chest. My phone buzzed in my back pocket. I pulled it out. "Dad, still think you're better than us?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I deleted the message. And kept walking. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones you have to survive. Sometimes, the only way to grow is to lose the things you once begged to keep. There's a pain that comes with being discarded by your own family, but there's also power in surviving it. In choosing yourself when no one else does. In rewriting your worth with your own hands. Forgiveness is complicated. Closure isn't always clean. But peace? Peace is what happens when you stop waiting for them to come around, and start building a life they can't shake. Because at the end of the day, you don't owe anyone access to your healing just because they helped cause your wounds. And maybe, just maybe, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's freedom. What would you do if the people who raised you suddenly turned into strangers? Would you fight to win them back? Or would you finally walk away, and become someone they never saw coming?